Next up, we have Johnny Dane, who's an artist, naturalist, and earth shepherd. A seventh-generation Floridian, his heritage is English, French, Spanish, and Choctaw. He's worked as resident artist and naturalist at both Mount Shasta in California and the Spirit of the Swanee Music Park here in Live Oak. Johnny describes himself as a lifelong student of synchronicity and as a phenologist, a person who studies nature and nature's cycles. I have to turn that on.
If I need this or not. Can you hear me in the back pretty well? Excellent. Greetings, everybody. I am so honored to be here tonight. There he is. All these people on this panel are like superheroes to me. Not only on this panel, but many, many, many people in this room I've known like family for many years, and I'm inspired and I admire all of you very dearly, especially for your love for the springs and the natural world and for Florida. And I'm just incredibly humbled and honored to be part of this. I was born in Winter Haven, Florida, in 1961, on the Winter Haven Ridge, physiographic landform that lies in between the Lake Wales Ridge and the Lakeland Ridge to the west. I was born in the Sand Hills that one time was characterized by longleaf pines, Florida scrub, marshlands, lakes, hardwood hammocks. There's still a little bit of that left in my homeland. I was born in the Peace River watershed, which is also known as Tolbert Chopko, Seminole Creek language. And my mother's mother was Choctaw, and my father's mother was not genetically Native American, but she was a Florida Native American historian. And she was born in Inverness, Florida in 1889 and grew up with black people that had lived with the Seminoles. So she actually knew people that knew Osceola. And she learned a lot of Native American place names and the names of plants and animals. She also knew and learned a lot about medicinal plants. So when my grandfather, Dr. George Alva Dane, came down from Emory in 1904 to start a practice, he found her, and when he discovered her knowledge of the herbal plants, he was like, "You're coming to me." So they got married in 1907, and 1908, my grandfather and a number of other people created the Florida Board of Health. So my family's been involved in environmental health in Florida all along. But when I was born, my dad recognized early on that I had an unusual knack for finding special places on the earth. And we used to play a game. And what we would do is I would get in the car. You got to understand, back in the early 60s, there were no laws about children being in the front seat or car seats. You know, as a matter of fact, a lot of the seats in these old cars were like benches. And I would stand on this passenger seat, and Dad would say, "All right, Johnny, where are we going to go? Go that way, Daddy. Go this way. Turn this way." We'd be driving through orange groves and by forests and by these lakes. I said, "That's it, Dad. Pull off here." So 19 out of 20 of the places that we went to, we walked out and then immediately found Indian artifacts. So this is one of the skills that I have. I have a very psychic connection to the natural world. And my dad recognized it at an early age. My grandmothers both recognized it. And so I was actually encouraged to practice and explore this. So when we lived in Lake Alfred, where I grew up, there was a wonderful natural area called the Mackay Estates. It's owned by a wonderful Scottish family that I would ultimately bond with and become very close to. And this land was about 550 acres of various ecosystems. There was longleaf pine and sandhill. There was a little bit of scrub. There were pine flatwoods, scrubby flatwoods, bay laurel swamp. There was a magnificent cypress area in the middle of the swamp where there was a heart-shaped opening in the trees. And I always felt very, very inclined to acknowledge the heart there. And I started to formulate my own kind of organic prayer work with the land in this place. And Mackay became my first land guru. So I've had land gurus through my life that taught me and trained me to understand different kinds of forms of earth spirituality. So when I went to Sarasota to go to the Ringling College of Art and Design, my friend Howard brought me to a place called Horse Creek, also known as Chilocotachee in Seminole Creek language. Does anyone know what Chilocotachee translates to? Horse Creek. So I started to explore this place, and I had a very phenomenal vision quest in the spring of 1982. And I met an angelic spirit guide who was, she said she was the governing angel of this watershed, which I thought was a very unique idea, that there could be a spiritual being that might be connected to a natural system. It made sense to me. I'd always sensed it before, but she made it very clear that this was very real. And I ended up training with her at Horse Creek. Now, Horse Creek, as you can see, is a tannin-colored stream. And I rendered it realistically for about a year. And then all of a sudden, uncharacteristically, I started rendering it as if it had spring water, like it was a blue river. Now, this was a conundrum, because I'm a stickler for authenticity. And this wonderful tannic stream is being rendered unrealistically, but I cannot resist making it look like a spring-fed river. And I'm like, I don't know what this is about, but there must be something to it. So I found a place on Horse Creek where there was an island, and that island was shaped like a heart. So the heart motif keeps coming up in the cosmology of my time. So when I finished my third year at Ringling, I was offered some pretty lucrative jobs up in New York City. And I had been asked in my vision quest to become a spokesperson for the earth, which I wholeheartedly accepted. But working in New York City did not seem to be in alignment with this, so I was concerned. And my cousin Charlie, who's very psychically attuned to me, called up one night and says, "Brother, I'm picking up on you, man. What's up?" I said, "Man, I've been offered these jobs. They're very, very lucrative. It'll advance my career, but I don't know that I can feel good about this." He says, "Well, before you make any decisions at all, you got to come to North Florida. I've got something to show you." So I went up the very next day, and on May the 12th, 1984, I went to the Ichetucknee River for the first time. And we got on inner tubes, and we went down the river, and we found different springs, and the crystal clarity of the water and all the incredible symbiotic symphony of life forms working together in integration really activated something inside my being. And we came up on this springs run, and we went in and we found an island that was shaped like a heart. And I'm like, okay. So I decided not to go to New York. I moved up to Gainesville, and I took a humble job antiquing wooden Christmas ornaments at Country Plus so I could meditate by the river. And so each of these places has prepared me for the next, and Ichitucknee ultimately prepared me for Mount Shasta. But I spent 5 years very fervently in discovery and exploration of the Ichitucknee. And each spring, I formed a relationship with at different times, and they had the different blessings and lessons and characteristics. And then I would go on to another spring and really get involved with that one. But there was one spring near the mission group that was really weird. And it had this strange algae that we now know as lingua. And it was dark, and there was no life forms in the spring at all. It was almost like, ugh. You know, it gives you chills when you see this thing. You know, it's like, but I was impressed. I was like, there's something about this. Well, of course, later on, the lingua would start to characterize other parts of the river, and transition would begin. But before that transition happened, I decided I wanted to match my vibration to the Ichitucknee. So I gave up my bad habits, and I changed my diet, and I started to meet these wonderful spiritual people that taught me about meditation and how to eat properly. And I learned about organic farms and organic food, and I started working on seeing, could I possibly match my vibration to that crystal clear river? And in the spring of 1988, I did. It was a very powerful experience. And then it wasn't long after that I was called out west, and I started my experience from Mount Shasta. So my experience with the springs is not limited to Florida. So I had visions of Mount Shasta all my life, not knowing what it was or why I was called to it. But when I ultimately found it, I knew I had to spend time there. And when I got up on the mountain, I was led to this beautiful alpine meadow that is spring-fed. And I became the resident artist and naturalist there for many, many years. One of the things I did was work with the native people there who revere that spring as being the most sacred place in the world, the Sawel Mem. And their belief system was that the well-being of the spring and the well-being of the meadow the well-being of the earth was contingent on their well-being. So part of my work was to not only look after this place, but to teach people about the cosmology and the sacredness of the springs. And then this ended up spilling over into all my work here in Florida and in between. I've been very bonded to North America. I've only been off this continent once for about a month to go to Maui, but I would love to go to other places in the world, but I have been very devoted to the North American continent. One time I was driving back from Mount Shasta, and my intuition told me I needed to go to Hopi land, so I went to Second Mesa, and I went to a cultural center there, and I pulled in, and right away I could see these two guys way down across the parking lot, like waving at me. And I was like... So I went to see them, and they said, "Do you have a connection to eagles?" I'm like, "Yeah." "Do you have a connection to springs?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do." He said, "We've been waiting for you. We're going to take you on a tour." And I'm like, "Wait a second. How long is this going to take?" You know, I thought I was just going to drop in and I'll be on my way to New Mexico, you know. But no, they want to take me on this long tour. So I'm like, all right, look, I got to eat. Let me get a room at the cultural center. So I went and got a room. I ate. I came back and I got these guys, and we took off. Lamar and William. They're like, "Hey, Johnny, it's good to have you, man." And I'm looking at them like, "Yeah, thanks." So we ended up going to these springs that were not flowing. And they brought me there, and they washed my feet in the spring. And they said, "We want you to pray." Well, I happen to know enough of Hopi language that I prayed in their language, which completely blew their mind because they had no idea that I could do that, but I did. And then they told me, they said, "Our problem is this. You know, we have a strong multi-thousand-year heritage on this property that acknowledge the holy organic pattern and the sacredness of all the elements in the water. It's a very strong spiritual law. And 30 years ago, our people divided and broke it. And we're suffering. And we want you to pray about that. So I did. I was very honored to do that. The Patuaquatsi, in the name of the springs in the Hopi land. So I bonded with them and came back to Florida. I didn't expect to talk about this tonight, but I'm so inspired by these wonderful cultural spring experiences from other parts of the world that I felt like I really needed to enhance my own description about North America. So I've been called to many places to pray and do artworks. I teach. I bring artworks of maps, do map paintings. I feel very strongly about the spiritual connection of ecosystems with the people and the animals and plants that live in them. And despite all the problems that we're facing, I think it's really important to take the long view. There's a principle in physics called autopoiesis, popularized by Friedrich Capra, based on studies of ecology. And what this principle simply states is that when you take the pernicious influences out of a natural system or a human body, healing will naturally occur. And that's what we can do, that's what we need to do, that's what we will do. There will be retreats, there'll be meditations, there'll be education that incorporates the spirituality as well as the scientific knowledge. And we're going to raise the Springs culture up. I have one more piece to show you here. This is my Ichitutney wildflower wheel. One of the ways I teach is by creating things that people can relate to. So after years of studying Ichitutney, I discovered that there were native indigenous wildflowers that bloom in each month of the year. So everybody has a birth flower at Ichitutney. And if you come up and ask me, I'll tell you what your birth flower is. Meanwhile, I have $20 Ichitutney wildflower prints available here if you're interested in taking one of those home. I think sense of place is the most important thing we can emphasize. We all can work on it. We can all share together. But more than anything, I just want to thank you for being such a wonderful family and for loving me and for loving each other. And I look forward to what we do with what we've been given to carry the best and the highest into the future. Thank you very much.